CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello, welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Fossil fuel production is set to increase despite tougher climate goals. The damning report from the United Nations.
Our other headlines: UK inflation slows unexpectedly, but the analysts warn it's likely to be the calm before the storm.
Facebook's facelift. Mark Zuckerberg reportedly plans a new name as the company struggles with a reputational crisis.
Russia calls for more aid for Afghanistan, but stops short of recognising the new Taliban government.
And breaking new ground, how Britain's first gigafactory is laying the foundations for the future.
We're going 100% green with our energy. We will not be using any fossil fuel-derived energy in the manufacturing process.
Fossil fuel production from major economies is set to increase over the next decade, despite tougher climate goals. That's according to a United Nations report, which says countries will produce more than double the amount of coal, oil and gas needed to stick to the commitment of restricting global warming to 1.5 degrees.
The countries analysed include the United States, the United Kingdom, China and Australia. All this comes just over a week before the COP26 climate talks begin in Glasgow, which aim to cut global emissions by the year 2030.
And the world isn't moving fast enough towards net zero carbon. That's the warning from the International Energy Agency.
It says although there are signs of a new green economy starting to emerge, it's proving harder than expected to ditch fossil fuels. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, what is the significance of this report?
Jamie, watching the webinar earlier, this event was online, the unveiling of this publication, this report by the International Energy Agency headquartered here in Paris. The chief energy modeller, Laura Cozzi, she began with a warning saying that we are going into COP26 with the glass 80% empty in terms of what we need to do and what we haven't done yet to face up to the climate emergency broadly and the goal of getting to net zero electricity emissions specifically. She said the focus was on the G7 nations, so the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, Japan and Canada, along with the European Union. The focus is on those wealthy democracies to lead the way for other nations, to take the steps now to upgrade and update their infrastructure, to try to triple their investment in low emissions technologies in order to be able to hit that ambition of 2035 being net zero emissions in the electricity sector, the most emitting of all the different sectors when it comes to global power use. She said that by investing in infrastructure, by investing in low emissions, the G7 nations should be able to create about 2.5 million jobs over the next 10 years due to that. And she also focused on the need to celebrate nations like Ireland and Denmark, which have already done so well with wind and solar powers making up their energy mix, that they actually need to advance their technologies even further. That's the good news for EU nations, smaller EU nations, but larger economies in the G7 like the US and Germany do need to do more to try to ensure that more of their energy mix is made up with low emissions. So the focus is not, the IEA said, to get to zero emissions immediately. You need to have this bridging time where you have low emissions such as nuclear or fossil fuels with carbon capture before you can entirely get to hydropower, solar power and wind power making up 100% of your energy mix. But really the goal that the IEA recommending to the G7 to try to hit this 2035 aim, there needs to be more done faster when it comes to reducing emissions.
Ross, if a wake-up call was needed, I mean, this really does make for pretty uncomfortable reading ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow next week.
That's where all the eyes are focused now, Jamie, this run-up to COP26. The world nations starting to get ready. International organisations like the IEA starting to prepare as well, sending out this message to G7 nations ahead of that summit. The UK, one of those G7 nations, the host of the climate talks, wanting to also show it's committed to its aims when it released its own net zero ambitions earlier this week. It's going to be tough for the United Kingdom. We have not had confirmation from China yet that Xi Jinping is going to be attending. The Chinese president has said that China wanted to confront the climate emergency by not financing any new coal-fired power plants abroad, but by tackling the problems that China has suffered in the past with biodiversity and species loss. Also today, Russia confirming, the presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, not going to be attending the talks. In the United Kingdom, Russia also says it wants to confront the climate emergency. It is a signatory of the Paris Climate Accord, and it does have its own goal to try to get to zero emissions by 2050. But the UK really suffering at the moment from this unconfirmed if China's going to be there, Russia pulling out as well. So it does need to get support from the other G7 nations to really try to get these agreements signed. It's not just about announcing particular green goals, Jamie. Of course, what also needs to be laid out at the COP26 summit is the ambition for how to attain those goals.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you very much.
Climate change will be top of the agenda at the summit of G20 leaders in Rome at the end of the month. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi says without the involvement of the world's largest economies, the Paris Agreement and global warming limit cannot be achieved. The Rome summit will take place just before COP26. Rachel Cletus is Policy Director of the Climate and Energy Programme at the Union of Concerned Scientists, a non-profit science advocacy organisation based in the United States. And she joins us now. Thanks very much indeed for being with us today. So this UN report says that major economies are still extracting too many fossil fuels and will continue to do so despite targets to cut their use. Why is that?
Yeah, look, this latest report, the production gap report from the UN that was released today, is a very sobering report that confirms that richer countries, major emitting countries, are just not doing enough to get off fossil fuels. And that's the fundamental solution to climate change. We have to get off fossil fuels, make that sharp turn away towards clean energy within this decade. And what we're continuing to see is countries around the world doubling down on fossil fuels, not making the shift that we need to see, and therefore not seeing the bending of the global emissions curve that we need to see to meet our global climate goals. The science is also very sobering. We're seeing some very devastating climate impacts around the world: wildfires, droughts, flooding, heat waves. This climate crisis is here and now, and governments are just not doing enough to address it.
So why do you think they aren't moving away from fossil fuels and in some cases are actually increasing their use in the years to come?
One thing I want to say loud and clear, the fossil fuel industry and its political allies have been a major impediment to climate action and climate progress over the years. And we continue to see that right now in the political stalemates around the world. Right here in the US, we're fighting for a big piece of legislation to help bring down emissions in the US, and we're running into the same fossil fuel politics that exists elsewhere in the world. So that's really important. Holding these companies and their allies accountable in this moment is critical. And this report today points out the need for financial disclosure and transparency around the actions of these fossil fuel companies. The other big piece here is recognizing that we have an enormous opportunity in shifting to clean energy. It will be a huge public health boom in addition to addressing climate change. And that's why governments should embrace it. They should invest in dislocated fossil fuel workers and communities, of course, to help with the transition. But this is a no-brainer for climate, for our health, and for the future of our planet.
And we have, of course, got the COP26 climate conference next week. Do you think that will change things?
COP26 right now is happening at a very precarious moment in terms of where global climate action is. We know that the country's current emissions reduction pledges are far off track from where they need to be. We don't see energy markets bend towards cleaner energy fast enough, even though clean energy costs are falling dramatically. So leaders will really have to step up if the Glasgow summit is to be a success. And delivering on the concrete policy details of how they're going to cut their emissions is very important. Not just words, not just 2050 goals, but within this decade, what are they going to do to wean their countries off fossil fuels?
And how big a role do you think finance plays? We're still seeing new funding for fossil fuel companies, but what difference would it make if they switch that funding to renewables?
A tremendous difference. As the IEA report pointed out last week that was covered earlier in your program, shifting financing to cleaner energy is very, very important. We have seen some glimmers of hope where countries are stepping back from overseas finance of fossil fuel projects like China announced last month, but it's not enough and it needs to happen much more quickly. Right now, our investments in fossil fuels are outpacing that in clean energy in many places. And unfortunately, we did not experience that green recovery from the COVID-related economic downturn that the world experienced last year. That was a missed opportunity, and we still have time. We still need to do this.
Rachel Cletus, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
China's new-build home prices have stalled for the first time since the pandemic began. Prices in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Shenzhen were flat in September, compared with 0.3% growth in August. Analysts say China's clampdown on real estate speculators and tightening credit for developers have driven down prices.
The food delivery company Deliveroo has upgraded its full-year growth forecast after a stronger-than-expected third quarter. The gross value of orders increased by 58% year-on-year, despite lockdown measures easing in most of its markets. The UK company now expects its gross transactional value to rise by 60 to 70% this year. That's up from a previous forecast of 50 to 60%.
Dutch chip maker ASML has posted better than expected quarterly results, but its sales fell short of expectations. They hit $5.8 billion, lower than a predicted $6.1 billion. The company says it expects losses for the next quarter as it faces a materials shortage in its supply chain.
Now, Facebook is reportedly planning to rebrand itself, including changing its name. That's as the social media giant comes under increasing pressure from governments around the world over allegations of wrongdoing.
In the latest incident, the UK authorities have issued a nearly $70 million fine for breaching market rules over last year's purchase of the platform Giphy. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent John Tarrett in New York. Hello to you, John. So what's behind this rebrand for Facebook?
Hey, Robin. Hey, Jamie. Well, I think the fact that Facebook is under attack from all quarters is really what is behind this. I mean, look, it's accused of being a monopoly. It's accused of work discrimination. Only today it's paid a $14 million fine to try and settle that one. It's accused of putting profit before safety. We had Frances Haugen on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about it on this program. It's accused of all sorts of things in Europe, including the story you just mentioned, which I hadn't heard of until this moment. And, of course, it's accused of not paying enough tax all over Europe in jurisdictions there. So for all of that, I think that they'd like a new name to have a fresh start. Now, I am pretty sure I will eat my hat if the name Facebook disappears. Well, it's not going to disappear. I'll tell you now. The name Facebook won't disappear, nor will the other companies that they run. Those will stay on the app and on the website, just as we've always known. But the new name, we are told, is going to reflect the metaverse. Now, the metaverse is Mark Zuckerberg's latest buzzword. He uses it all the time, and people aren't entirely sure what it means, but, we'll have Facebook, WhatsApp, and Insta. They will remain, but the overarching name of the company will be something that reflects the metaverse. And the metaverse is really where the internet collides much more with our daily lives. So instead of just being on a tablet or a desktop, it comes into clothing, for example. Facebook has done a deal recently with Ray-Ban, the glasses people, and their first smart glasses will have a camera, and I guess you'll be able to see stuff on your lenses, I don't know. But that's an example of the metaverse, so the name will reflect that. And there are examples out there already. The most famous of them all is Alphabet, which is the holding company name for Google and YouTube and a number of other things that nobody frankly cares about that they do. Tapestry is the same thing for the very high-end stores, Kate Spade and Coach. And there are pros and cons to doing this. The cons are that it can create confusion among your audience because they suddenly meet a name that they are completely unfamiliar with. Though, as I say, the Facebook site is going to stay. It could take time to get all this done, and it's very costly as well, because you have to change every business card, every sign at headquarters, every bit of headed notepaper. It all has to be changed. The pros, though, are that you do get to redefine your identity completely. You get a chance to reach a new audience and expand your business. And I think that really that is the key point there, this redefining the identity. Because in future, if they do this, and I'm told that he's making an announcement on the 28th of October, of course it could leak beforehand, but if they do this, then all these allegations about monopolies and discrimination and profit before safety, all of that will be handled by a company with a brand new name. And Facebook and WhatsApp and Insta are going to be left out of it. So that's what it's all to do with, I suspect.
And John, let's talk about something that apparently everybody is talking about, a certain show on Netflix that's given it a boost.
I know, and this would be Squid Game out of Korea, of course. And I mean, the thing about Netflix is that it is one of the most innovative companies of our time. And it has literally changed the world because, of course, it's given us binge watching. So we can all sit in our tracky bottoms at home now and watch The Crown from beginning to end on a Saturday and a Sunday, or indeed even over one day. They've also given us the idea of universal appointment viewing. Because what used to happen was an American TV station would make a program that would become very successful in this huge market here, and only after the first season or even the second season would it go overseas to fresh markets to make more money. So in the case of Dallas, for example, which we used to watch 30 years ago on the BBC, when we were watching it in the UK, America was almost a year ahead of us. Well, that doesn't happen because of Facebook now. They produce these programs and everybody, wherever they are in the world, can see them all at the same time. So here's the numbers for Facebook then. Massive third quarter beat. Earnings per share $3.19 as opposed to $2.56. That's a big beat. Revenue $7.48 billion, exactly where Wall Street expected it to be. But as always with Netflix, it's about the subscriber numbers. Now, Wall Street have been expecting 3.8 million to be put on in the third quarter. It was 4.4. That's a big beat. In the fourth quarter, which includes December, when that jolly old man with a big fat tummy, no, not Jamie, but Father Christmas, comes down your chimney. They're putting on 8.5 million, which is a little bit less than Wall Street had been expecting. And, of course, to answer your question, Squid Game, according to Netflix, 142 million members have watched that program in just the first 4 weeks, making it their biggest show ever, even bigger than The Crown, which I certainly love to see. Just quickly, they say APAC, Asia Pacific, and Europe are their biggest growth regions right now. But the share price is down today. It was up yesterday, it's down today. And the reason for that is I think they ever so slightly missed the projection on the number of subscribers in the fourth quarter, the December quarter. And I think there's a sense that streaming is getting a bit saturated now. You know, lots of players in the market. How much more can this company grow? So at the moment, it's down just 1%. Robin and Jamie?
John, it's a thank you from me, but I think Jamie had something else he wanted to say.
No, I was just going to say, remember that John said he'd eat his hat if Facebook changed its name. So it's on tape, John. We can have you live on the programme eating your hat, OK, just in case that happens. Good to see you. Bye for now.
John, thanks very much.
UK inflation slowed unexpectedly last month, but the analysts warn it's likely to be the calm before the storm for consumers.
The dip has been solely driven by lower price rises across the hospitality sector compared to the same time last year, when a government scheme offering half-price dining ended.
September saw inflation drop slightly to 3.1%, down from 3.2% in August, but it's expected to rise again from this month and could force the Bank of England to raise interest rates from November.
There's more of an optimistic outlook in the Eurozone, despite inflation rising to 3.4% in September, up from 3% in August. The European Central Bank says it expects prices to start easing next year, with some economists predicting a return to the target of 2%.
Fiona Cincotta is a market analyst at City Index. Fiona, welcome. Good to see you. These figures show price rises dipping in September. Presumably that's good news. Should we be opening the champagne?
It's a little bit early, yes. No, as you said, I mean, price rises did just ease slightly, unexpectedly, but they are expected to continue rising. In fact, the Bank of England expect price inflation, CPI inflation, to hit 4% by the end of the year. And if we just have a look at sort of what's driving these price rises, it's the energy crisis, surging energy prices, supply chain disruptions, and also labour shortages. These aren't problems which are expected to be resolved quickly. So we're expecting them to continue keeping prices elevated going forward.
Now, we've been reporting on, obviously, everyone's reporting on the rise around the world of energy prices and food prices. I'm guessing these figures do not reflect those recent increases.
That's right. So they don't reflect the really recent ones. We have seen rises in energy, for example, though that has been a part of it. I mean, if we have a look at sort of oil prices, they have been rising steadily now for quite a long time. And for example, fuel prices were sort of a 19% increase in those inflation numbers. But that was before that fuel shortage that we had here in the UK just recently. So that again is another reason that we expect to see these numbers continue rising as we go through October, November, December, because those numbers are going to be reflected. The higher energy costs are going to be reflected.
Just a quick thought on the Eurozone, because inflation there seems to be rising more quickly than in the UK. I mean, is that all down to soaring energy prices? Why the disparity?
So that is a big part of it. That is the main factor that seems to be driving prices higher. I mean, if we just have a look at the Eurozone, for example, at core inflation, which strips out the more volatile food movements such as fuel, energy prices and food, that's actually still down at 1.9%, which is below the ECB's target of 2%. And as we've heard from the ECB that they do expect sort of this inflation to be more transitory than perhaps we're expecting here in the UK. And the IMF weighed into it as well today, saying that they don't expect sort of inflation to be spiralling into next year. And that's sort of perhaps to do as well with the slack that's available in the labour force in the Eurozone, which isn't necessarily the case in the UK.
Shoppers going to do their shopping, though, whatever you buy, are noticing an increase in the cost of living. I wonder how much further does inflation have to go before you see some kind of intervention from the central banks?
Well, that's right, and I think we're getting close to it now. Definitely here in the UK, we've heard that the Bank of England have adopted a much more hawkish stance just in the past week or so. We've really sort of seen them looking towards the possibility of hiking interest rates. And I mean, there are sort of speculation in the markets now that the Bank of England are going to hike rates as soon as this year. And previously that was going to be sort of, first quarter next year. So there has been a move forward, definitely in the UK as far as hiking rates are concerned, because what we don't want to do is get into that situation where sort of rising prices sees consumers really sort of reining their spending and growth start to slow. That's something that the central banks will want to avoid.
Fiona, good to see you. Thanks for your time. Fiona Cincotta there at City Index.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. They say electric cars are kinder to the planet, but what about those batteries, their raw materials and their long supply chains?
Zero emissions on the road. But what happens when an electric vehicle runs out of charge? The move from combustion engines to electric is accelerating. Rising fuel prices and growing awareness of the climate emergency are driving the change. If the future is electric, are city roadways ready? Is battery technology really greener? And how can car makers put the brakes on costs? Plug in to our EV special series, only on CGTN.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders prepare for vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the planet have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Now we're talking electric cars next. Juliet Mann is steering the rest of the show.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Robin. That's right. We've been asking big questions this week, looking at the electric vehicle market. How fast is it accelerating? How to put the brakes on costs? And honestly, how green is it anyway? The shift to EVs needs batteries, and batteries are the tricky chapter of the virtuous electric car story. Electric vehicle batteries are made of metals lithium, cobalt, vanadium and manganese, as well as graphite, which is a form of the element carbon. Now, these metals typically originate in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Australia and in Chile. Now, cobalt is one of the most expensive metals in EV batteries. It costs somewhere between $33,000 and $35,000 per tonne. It's pricey. And to get it, well, cobalt is dug out of open-pit mines in the DRC. And from there, it's shipped all the way to Finland, which is where you'll find the largest cobalt refinery in Europe. Next, it's delivered to China. That's where most of the world's cathode and battery production actually takes place. And the cells are then shipped to the United States, sometimes to Europe, and turned into packs before being dispatched yet again, this time, though, to automotive production lines. Now, all of that means that cobalt can travel more than 30,000 kilometres from mine to automaker. So those are the issues around mining the metals for batteries, but once they've reached the end of their life, then what? Guy Henderson looks at the UK's attempts to improve battery sustainability.
Right now it's a rundown ex-mining area north of Newcastle in northeast England. In a couple of years, this will be Britain's first gigafactory. Work is just getting underway.
It's 230 hectares.
On a site tour, the CEO of the company that runs it, British Volt, explains that the substantial amount of power needed will come entirely from renewable sources.
We're 100% green with our energy. We will not be using any fossil fuel-derived energy in the manufacturing process. We're connecting directly to the grid. We'll only buy green electrons. They'll either come through the grid, or we'll also be looking to connect directly to wind. And we've got a very large solar array on the roof of the factory. So 100% green electrons, no fossil fuels in our batteries.
That is not the only environmental challenge for the industry to overcome, though.
Britain will be banning the sale of new fossil fuel-driven cars in 2030 to protect the environment. So if it wants to continue to be a manufacturing hub for electric vehicles after that date, it's going to have to scale up its domestic battery production pretty fast. That will come with its own environmental footprint, though, one which will also have to be managed.
The fact remains current batteries still use non-renewable resources like lithium, which are mined. That leaves its mark. Efforts are underway to reduce the environmental impact by improving recycling techniques. At the moment, most battery cells aren't reused. Shredding's currently the most common method of doing that. Dr. Rob Somerville is part of a joint project between British universities aimed at refining that process, as well as separating the most valuable raw materials for reuse.
We want to separate the active material, so the graphite or the mixed metal oxide, from the copper or the aluminium. That way we can recover the aluminium as aluminium metal, as opposed to turning it into a slag and then losing all the embedded energy cost in trying to get the aluminium back as a metal. If we can also increase the purity, it will make our processes much more cost effective.
One expert says such research is cutting edge.
In terms of research and development, the UK is very well placed. There's a lot of effort gone in from Innovate UK, from the government, from universities, from various research organisations to keep the UK very much at the forefront of battery development, and in particular the sort of sustainability side of it. So looking at different combinations of chemicals, looking at their environmental impact. So I'm confident on that front.
There's likely to be more of these sites dotted across the country in the years to come. Making them sustainable is a work in progress. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Blythe, in North East England.
Well, so far we've been looking at battery-powered electric cars, but there is an alternative energy game in town. Another green energy contender, hydrogen. Let's buckle up with Nicole Johnston in Wales.
It's a classic look, like a 1960s racing car in a striking green. Aerodynamic, light and powered by hydrogen. Let's go inside.
That's forwards, neutral and reverse. And if you press forwards, we're now ready to drive off.
Hugo Spowers designed this car and called it the Rasa.
The noises we hear are the electric motors, and then when the fuel cell starts up, you hear the compressor. Sounds like a very quiet jet engine.
Instead of petrol, the car has hydrogen in the tank. It passes through a fuel cell and then converts it to electricity. Hugo says the world needs both battery-powered cars and hydrogen.
From a customer's point of view, it's more convenient to use. From an environmental point of view, for a range of over about 150 miles, it can be more efficient. From a commercial point of view, it is an awful lot cheaper to build a long-range hydrogen car than a battery car. This car weighs less than the battery does in a Tesla, and the cost of one of those batteries is, and always will be, very, very high.
The company aims to set up a car subscription service in local areas where people are driving short distances and only need a small car. A trial is already underway.
The real test is to drive it, and it seems simple enough. The idea is that for $500 a month, all of your maintenance and running costs would be covered, and you'd have this green energy zippy car to drive locally.
There's over 3 million cars in the UK that only ever operate in a 25-mile radius, and that's the market we're going for. Local cars, not urban, but local, operating in a small area because of the lack of infrastructure.
And there are plans to build a factory to roll out 5,000 hydrogen cars a year. At the moment, they're built by hand.
Very aerodynamic. These door handles, it's about as aerodynamic a door handle as it's possible to be. And we also have these spats on the wheels, which are very rare. They were on, Citroën used them on the DS back in the 1960s.
Underneath, there's a smooth surface for airflow, and the entire design reduces drag. Agile, nimble, lightweight and affordable. Plus loads of fun to drive. That's a car we can all take into the future with us. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, Wales.
It looks good too, but back to batteries, a big component of the EV future to make travel greener and cleaner, but also to electrify economic growth. Now, batteries are about 40% of the value of an electric car. China got the message a decade ago, and Europe too is pouring support into creating a homegrown battery manufacturing industry. Well, Steve Levine is, among other things, the author of The Powerhouse, America, China and the Great Battery War. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. Look, you were talking batteries and got excited about them long before it became a thing, weren't you? From the chemistry of it right up to geopolitics. So why is this technology so important for the global economy?
It's a big new industry that's going to be worth multiple trillions of dollars in this decade. By the end of the decade, one of the estimates is that it'll be worth $24 trillion, and this is spread over China, the United States, Europe, and so on. So you have a lot of countries and a lot of big companies and startups going for this.
And so a lot of jobs. Who would you say is leading the charge, though? You mentioned China, though, and I'd also like to know who's playing catch-up.
Right. So, yes, China. So what you had is a bunch of countries, China, the United States, Japan, Germany, France. Around a dozen years ago, they all piled into both batteries and electric cars, but most of them lost interest very, very quickly. China stayed in the game, and that's why it's ahead today. Europe is playing a very good game in my view, especially Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Norway. Both of them are putting down facts on the ground factories and inviting the car companies to with very good support to sell their automobiles there. And Germany is doing a very, very good job. It's setting up an industrial base for the processing of the battery metals. The United States, while a lot of the technology was invented in the United States by Americans, is way, way behind. It just hasn't gotten its act together as yet to establish cell-making factories or the metals and processing that goes into them.
Well, do they know something that the rest of the world don't? I mean, do they perhaps maybe see it as an interim technology, and that investors and governments should actually be piling into something else, like hydrogen, for example?
No, it's that the United States, big companies and the government themselves. I've tried to put my finger on this exactly what it is, but a couple of things: lost vision. Okay about putting money into research, startups, Silicon Valley, inventing stuff. But when it comes to manufacturing, Americans have lost whatever we had decades ago, and maybe a century ago in terms of doing the things that you have to do next. On the point of hydrogen, I did listen to the segment you had on that. This is a disputed territory. A lot of people say that hydrogen, in fact, is 3 times, when you count the whole stretch of industry from making the hydrogen all the way through, until it gets into the cars, 3 times as polluting as a battery, and it's not as efficient as when you're getting it into a car. And this is why it has not been scaled up to the degree where hydrogen could make a big push and a big impact is in public transportation, like buses and like long distance trucking.
Wow, 3 times as polluting, but maybe we'll see more trucks powered by hydrogen. Steve Levine, thank you very much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Don't forget, we've got our EV special all week, so tune in tomorrow when we'll be looking at China's EV expansion into Europe.
You can really see that we're absolutely able to compete and be on eye level with German competitors.
Well, in Germany, where drivers are traditionally loyal to homegrown brands, Chinese company Airways is shaking up the market. Interesting stuff, isn't it, all of these partnerships? Jamie and Robin, back to you.
It's all fascinating. Juliet, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll see you tomorrow.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Russia calls for more international aid for Afghanistan and for world leaders to accept the new reality of Taliban control.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. What's on your agenda this week? I know when it comes to news, you're sport for choice. So many channels, so many opinions. But it's time to step off the news roundabout, time to cut out the noise, get to the heart of the real story with a talk show with a difference. I'll be finding out what the world is thinking by talking to the global decision makers and helping you set your own news agenda. Remember, we don't just report the news, we set the agenda.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Fossil fuel production is set to increase despite tougher climate goals, a damning report from the United Nations.
UK inflation slows unexpectedly, but analysts warn it's likely to be the calm before the storm.
And Facebook's facelift. Mark Zuckerberg reportedly plans a new name as the company struggles with a reputational crisis.
Russia has called for international aid to support Afghanistan at a summit hosting Taliban officials. The Moscow meeting, attended by China, Pakistan and India, has ended with a joint statement calling for the global community to engage in practical interaction with Afghanistan, taking into account the new reality of the country under Taliban control. But the participants also called on the Islamist leaders to respect the rights of ethnic groups and women and work towards an inclusive government. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. So, Stuart, this statement has just been released and has made various appeals to the Taliban as well as other global leaders. So, how did today's meeting play out?
Well, going into the meeting, even Russia admitted no major breakthroughs were expected, but we do now have a more cohesive picture about what international players consider should happen going forwards in Afghanistan. Taking a quick look at the joint statement, which, as you say, has just come out, they're still referring to the government in Afghanistan as an interim government. It's not yet the official government, and Russia said that's not going to happen for a while. But Russia did announce this is the new reality, and the joint statement agrees, all these countries agree, that this is the new reality, and people should be talking to the Taliban as the de facto leader in Afghanistan. What these countries are looking for, they say, is a peaceful, independent and economically developing state which is free from terrorism and drug-related crime and respects basic human rights norms. But Russia and the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expressed displeasure about the progress which has been made so far in Afghanistan, noting that the Taliban needs to create a truly inclusive government with ethno-political forces properly balanced within that government. Also, the Taliban need to get a handle on the terror threat in the country, even though the main concern is about terrorism emanating from Afghanistan into other Central Asian states. We know that ISIS-K are very active and continuing their terror campaign within the country itself. And finally, deep concern about the socio-economic and humanitarian situation in the country, and all the leaders attending agreed that urgent assistance is required.
A new administration's in power now. This fait accompli places great responsibility on the Taliban. We note their efforts to stabilize the military and political situation and set up the work of state apparatus.
So, Stuart, rather than an interim government, the Taliban officials seem to be expecting a firmer commitment of support from Moscow. So what did they have to say?
Yes, they went into this meeting hoping for a few things, none of which they got. They wanted official recognition. That hasn't happened. They wanted more direct and confirmation of economic support. Now, the Taliban fudged this a little bit at a press conference after the meeting, saying that they had discussions with Russia about economic support, but nothing concrete came out of these meetings. And the Taliban also admitted, they say that the government they have formed is not final and that new reforms within the government will follow, clearly bowing to pressure from these countries to make their government more inclusive.
Is in Afghanistan now also inclusive. Yeah, you know about 500,000 employers working with us. All of them former employees. We need supporting peace in Afghanistan. We need reconstruction and rehabilitation of Afghanistan.
And the Taliban saying that their work to increase the ethnic political diversity within the country is going ahead, but there is more that can be done.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thanks very much.
Russia's president has announced a week-long shutdown to try to curb rising COVID-19 cases to come into effect from the end of this month.
Russia has been struggling to contain its latest coronavirus outbreak, with more than 34,000 infections confirmed over the past 24 hours and more than 1,000 deaths. That's the highest number of daily deaths since the pandemic began. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro should face murder charges over his response to the pandemic, according to a draft report by a Senate inquiry.
It says Bolsonaro turned down early opportunities to buy vaccines and allowed the virus to spread in the hope of achieving herd immunity. Bolsonaro has dismissed the inquiry as politically motivated. The British Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has, while we've been on air, holding a press conference as COVID cases rise again across the UK. He told journalists that people should wear masks on public transport and in enclosed areas. He says he's expecting daily cases to hit 100,000 cases a day in winter.
Health leaders are calling for the return of some restrictions in order to avoid a winter crisis. The UK reported its highest daily number of COVID deaths since March on Tuesday. Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is here with us in the studio. So this figure of 100,000 daily cases by winter, pretty horrifying. But nevertheless, the government is still holding its ground. Why?
Extraordinary press conference, actually. Sajid Javid, we haven't seen as much of him as we used to see of Matt Hancock when he was Health Secretary, but he seemed to take it all on the chin, all the bad news that the medical fraternity's been throwing at him, saying, you know, things are getting worse, up 16% cases on last week. He said that it could go to 100,000 a day, 1,000 people being hospitalised a day. He said we're going to have to do what it takes. He says the threat of people dying remains low, but it's probably going to get a lot worse as we get into winter. He talked about a new variant, AY4.2, which is an offspring of the Delta variant. So he mapped out a very bleak picture and then said, but we're going to stick to the current plan. We're going to keep going the way we're going. What he did say was, and this is a refrain we've had from this government all year, is that the science is the answer. The vaccine programme got us where we are just now. We're going to continue with the vaccine programme. He announced 2 new deals with antiviral drugs that they're going to buy, one from Pfizer, one from Merck Sharp and Dohme, which they say could be being given to patients by the end of the year, which they say will vastly increase their medics' ability to treat patients. And he also then went back to say, he said that 5 million people still unvaccinated. He wants that to be cleaned up. He wants youngsters to start having their jabs more often. And he wants the elderly who aren't having their booster to get their boosters done. So they're boosting the science, but they want to stick with the situation is at the moment. However, he did then say, but let's be careful when we meet people. Let's meet them outdoors rather than inside. Let's wear a mask. Let's get tested. So he came up with all these things, which are what the medics are asking for anyway. He just made it a suggestion rather than legislation.
And what will the medical profession make of all of this? Because doctors and nurses and the medical community have been calling for the UK government to change its position. I mean, there isn't much change here, really, is there?
No, there's none. I mean, there's recommendations that where people are more mindful in the way they have already been through legislation in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but no real change. No plan B, as they're saying. But what is interesting is we now have what is looking like the early days of some decision-making. We've got the government, which is under pressure from hospitality, it's under pressure from the travel industry. It doesn't want to lock down again. It really doesn't. It wants to push forward, if it can, relying on vaccines. You've got the medical frontliners in the hospitals who are saying, look, things are getting difficult here. We've got a backlog of treatments we're still trying to get through. We've got people starting to show signs of flu. That could be really bad this year. Plus, our patients with coronavirus are going up. We're in a position where we're starting to get worried. And in the middle, they've got the scientists doing the modelling, and those scientists aren't really steering one way or the other yet.
And how much of this is about the UK government not wanting to be leading public opinion and leading the UK back into further restrictions and instead handing responsibility over to the newspapers and the medical profession?
Yeah, well, we've heard it so many times. We are relying on the science. We are taking our guidance from the scientists. That's how they dealt with the first lockdown and the second lockdown and how they dealt with the vaccination programme. Now, the government's position seems to be that vaccines will win out in the end. The new vaccine, the boosters, the teenagers getting their vaccine, that's what we need to do to keep people safe. But at the same time, you've got Sajid Javid saying, well, you know, maybe we should be wearing our masks a little more. Maybe we should be, you know, watching our behaviours, which is something that England particularly has been criticised on. Anyone who goes on a train or a bus in England at the moment finds people aren't wearing their masks very much anymore. People aren't concerned, particularly in England, about the virus anymore. How is the government going to push that awareness without starting to legislate people back into either this Plan B, which is mandatory mask wearing, and COVID passports, perhaps? It doesn't want to do that. it's going to start trying to nudge people to be more careful. That's all it's going to do at this case, at this moment, and keep hoping that the science wins out in the day with the vaccines.
Andrew Wilson, thanks very much.
The DPRK has confirmed it launched a ballistic missile from a submarine. State media made the announcement a day after South Korea reported the test. It comes as Japanese and United States officials meet with their South Korean counterparts to discuss restarting diplomacy with Pyongyang.
14 people have been killed in a bomb targeting a military bus in Syria. The vehicle was reportedly crossing a bridge in the centre of Damascus during the morning rush hour when 2 devices exploded. A third was later deactivated. No one has claimed responsibility.
Japan's Mount Aso has begun erupting, spewing plumes of ash several kilometres into the sky. The volcano is a popular tourist destination, but sightseers have been warned to stay away over fears of lava flows and falling rocks. Police say 16 people who had gone hiking on the mountain before the eruption have all returned safely.
The death toll from flooding in the Indian state of Uttarakhand has risen to at least 46. Rescuers worked through the night to retrieve bodies stuck in debris and to move people in vulnerable communities. The mountainous state has seen non-stop rain for the past 3 days, with flooding destroying roads, bridges and homes.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Spain's baby pandas wait to make their first public appearance.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. From Athens to Beijing, the Olympic flame has arrived in the Chinese capital ahead of the Winter Games in February.
This will be the second time Beijing hosts the Games. CGTN's Jung Yibing reports.
Beijing welcomed the Olympic flame all the way from Greece on Wednesday. The podium for the upcoming Winter Games was lit up at the Olympic Tower. The Chinese capital is the first city to host both the Summer and Winter Games. And the much-anticipated plans for the torch relay to be held amid the pandemic were announced.
Putting public health and safety first, we have reached an agreement with the International Olympic Committee to shorten the routes, duration, and number of torchbearers. The torch relay will be held in 3 forms: the flame display, the traditional relay, and the online relay.
The traditional relay is scheduled from February 2nd to 4th next year, with some 1,200 torchbearers. There will be 3 routes in Beijing City proper, Beijing's Yanqing district, and the city of Zhangjiakou in neighboring Hebei province. The online relay will be held through AR, VR, online quizzes, and other creative ways. The committee hopes people all over the world can experience the relay through multiple channels and promote the Olympic ideals. With the Olympic flame arriving in Beijing and the release of the torch relay plan, the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics and Paralympics edge that one step closer. Organizers say they're ready to put on a concise, safe, and exciting Winter Games. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Beijing.
Giant pandas remain one of the world's most at-risk species, but a zoo in Spain is helping to change that.
For the second time in its history, Madrid's aquarium zoo has seen the birth of twin panda cubs. Rahul Pathak reports.
1 month old, but still very much under the close, watchful eye of their mother, Hua Zuba. Madrid's aquarium zoo's male panda twins have come a long way since they first appeared as tiny, hairless pink newborns. But now, despite looking more like very small giant pandas, they're still not quite ready to make their full public debut.
Well, you're looking at a very proud father, Bing Sing. Now, the twins themselves are currently with their mother, as they're still too young and too small to be seen by the general public. The first chance the rest of us will get to see the baby pandas in person, as it were, will be in April next year.
This birth is very important. We only have 2,500 or 3,000 pandas in total in the world, so everyone counts. The addition of 1 or 2 new pandas is very important for the worldwide total.
This is the second set of giant panda twins born in Madrid, the last pair being born back in 2010. China's Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding sent an expert to assist with the births to Madrid.
I felt very excited when I was requested to go to Spain to help with the birth of the pandas. Although the number of pandas has in general increased, it's still a vulnerable species and needs the protection of everyone.
The loan of pandas by China to countries like Spain has been part of what is known as panda diplomacy. More recently, the country has loaned pandas to zoos on commercial terms. And judging by the crowds watching Madrid's other panda, Julin, the aquarium zoo will certainly benefit commercially when the twins make their first public appearance next year. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Climate change is affecting some of the coldest parts of the world, including Russia, which is warming almost 3 times faster than the global average. The melting of the permafrost layer in the Russian Arctic is reshaping the landscape and forcing big changes to the way people live. To see more, go to europe.cgtn.com.
The headlines again. Fossil fuel production is set to increase despite tougher climate goals, the damning report from the United Nations.
The UK's health minister warns daily COVID cases could hit 100,000 this winter, and he urges people to get jabs and wear masks.
And Facebook's facelift, Mark Zuckerberg, reportedly plans a new name as the company struggles with a reputational crisis.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.